My name's Peter McDonald, and I've been asked to introduce myself, which I'll do my best to do here to you, telling you a little bit about who I am and what writing I do. I'm appearing at the moment in my guise as a poet, despite the surroundings. I've written 7 books of poems, I guess it is now. I do other things also that involve writing. I'm a literary critic, a kind of literary historian, an editor of other poets as well. And I work as a teacher of kinds, of sorts, a teacher of English literature, where I'm a professor of British and Irish poetry in the University of Oxford. So that's my introduction of myself. I've been asked, where is your favourite place to work? And it's seldom, to be honest, you get much choice in the matter. Just to explain where I am at the moment, like many people, I'm making the best of lockdown, having taken over here my son's bedroom. He's banished somewhere downstairs on his computer these days, while I sit up here working, which at the moment involves often talking to students and colleagues remotely. It's a very strange life, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you. If where do you do your work is more to do with where do you write your poems, then I have to say I'm not at all sure that I'd have a favourite place to do that. I mean, any place where a poem happens is a kind of sacred spot. So rare is the fact of a poem coming and getting itself written down by me. But no, I generally work at home in such spaces as become available there. And there's a certain sense, of course, in which you're kind of working all the time, whether you're walking through town or on the bus or on a walk outside. If a poem's on the go, you just have to listen and see what sounds, images, rhythms are coming through. A good idea if you're in a place where you can write them down, and if you're not, then you'd better remember them. Now, remarkable question here. What was the last book that blew you away? Blew you away? I know it's a phrase that's used a lot, but I suffer from a particular kind of stupidity, I suppose, that I often hear what people intend as a metaphor kind of literally. I'd be keen to avoid any kind of books with actual explosive properties. I haven't yet been sent one of those in the post, though I imagine the day may come. But in the metaphorical sense of blew you away, it means, I suppose, made you reassess everything. I don't know. Maybe a particularly good cookbook would have that kind of effect on me. No names, no pack drill. In terms of poetry, I actually, funnily enough, did come across a book that I was digging out of one of the boxes I'd unloaded from my home in Belfast, my old home in Belfast recently. A book I bought in 1978, I notice, by my signature on the inside of it, and for 75 pence, which is a wonderful book. It was my introduction, really, to this poet. It's this thing, the selection of Thomas Hardy's poetry, edited by John Wayne, the poet John Wayne. It's a little fragile now, but I started by, of course, I've known Hardy's poetry in many ways in the years between 1978 and now, but I hadn't been back to this book. It's a wonderful selection. It manages in about 200 odd pages to get through most of what's needful, I think, in Hardy. And the last week or so I've been just rereading that again, and unfortunately watching the pages crumble away and fall. But I was blown away, I suppose, in the sense that a poet I knew already very well reintroduced himself to me as somebody who's truly important, utterly contemporary, I suppose, for what that's worth. And I'd be happy reading nobody else for some time to come, I think, though life does not permit me that particular luxury. How did it feel, I'm asked though, putting my new book, The Gifts of Fortune, which I have here, together? Well, it felt much the same as any assembly of poetry does. This is the 7th time I've done it, so I'm kind of getting slightly used to that now. That's to say, there's always the sorting out process of the poems that seem kind of eligible or seem to ask for a place in a collection, and then trying to look into how they fit, how they might talk to one another. In this case, I was in the situation of trying to see themes that were emerging. I hadn't set out in the slightest to write poems with themes. Not at all sure I like the word themes. As I use it, I feel its fakeness hanging in the air. However, common elements, strings, chains of imagery that seem to reflect one another, talk to one another, shapes, forms too. I was aware, as I put the book together, that it was a very different kind of book to my last book of poems, a book called Herne the Hunter, from I think 2016, book of which I'm still very proud. Are you allowed to be proud anymore, or should you be humble at all times before your own works? I never know. Anyway, I'm still very proud of that. But it was a particular kind of book, which was, Herne the Hunter was full of rather complex formal structures that were mirroring one another and distorting one another in the mirroring. This I knew was not like that. I realised that the forms were looser, were in some ways designed to fall apart, to crumble. And I thought that in putting the book together, I wanted a reader to be able to sense the changes in poetic form as we went, and the interruptions to the signal of poetic form from time to time. When I say that there's one section of a poem called Blindness, which consists entirely of black and white square dots on the page, you'll see that I've been tempted into unusually experimental ground for me. There's still plenty of rhyme. There's still plenty of rhyme. I do feel that ought to be a recommendation for a book in some ways. I've written in my critical life, a whole volume of I guess fairly dense literary criticism about what rhyme is and why rhyme is important. And I still feel that, even though there's less organised close rhyme in this new book, I still absolutely feel that. I never once understood what people mean when they say in that facile way, oh, here's a poem that uses rhyme. of course it uses rhyme, but rhyme isn't a paintbrush or a tool to be used. It's of the essence of things. It's of the essence. You no more use rhyme than you might use the air when you breathe. What else are you going to use? Mind you, there are different ways of looking at that. Actually, just after I'd finished putting this book together, and was thinking of the formal side, I found a review of the last book, Hare and the Hunter, where somebody said, thinking they'd scored a tremendous hit, he uses rhyme. Of course, they uses rhyme. That way, he always knows where the next line's coming from. This is perfectly crazy, it seems to me, as an idea, passing itself off as criticism. One never knows where the next line's coming from. One never knows so much. And the new book, The Gifts of Fortune, is, I guess, largely about how little one knows about the good and bad things that are certainly coming your way. Now, I'm asked if I have a favourite poem in the new collection. No, I don't. But I thought it might be useful, I guess, now, to read one. And I'm going to read a poem that is rhymed. See, if you're listening to it, see if you can sense where the next line's coming from, But it's a curious poem, very unusual for me. And it's part of a sort of complicated patchwork in this book of poems drawn from the details of my working life. It's extremely fortunate that most of one's working life is spent being answerable to people who would never really be able to understand one's own poems or would wish to. And this keeps one from getting sacked, I think, quite often. But there's a sequence in the poem very much about work for me called Mud, which I'm, again, proud of. Goodness me, this terrible outbreak of pride. But the one I'm going to read is a much more practical working poem. I had a responsibility for about 3 years for overseeing an art collection. I didn't have to do any of the really hard work, but I got to do some of the fun stuff. And one of the great fun activities was receiving back a loan that had been made of a Michelangelo drawing. And I'd never really thought, how do these things get across the world? Who opens them? Until it fell to me to actually be one of the people opening this thing on its return, which was very exciting, I have to say. More exciting than opening up a new volume of poems by a contemporary poet, even oneself. So I'm going to read this poem, which is called Unpacking, the Michelangelo. On its wheels, the crate is a good 3 or 4 inches off the ground. Useful for the half hour it stood in a tarmac puddle at JFK, waiting for papers to be found. An oblong box made of new wood, still splintery around the sides, stickered and barcoded the way anything might be. Now it glides with the gentlest push along the floor of the storeroom up to a table we've cleared for it, a surface where cutters and pliers and wire cable have good room to accumulate. It takes two of us to lift it and lay the case completely flat. Screwdrivers first. An ordinary counterclockwise turn of the wrist is enough to loosen every one of the dozen threaded pins that held an outside panel fast, which then will simply lift away to lean lightly against a wall, while the peeling open begins, and layers of thick coating fall down to the ground. Stiff fasteners come out, and plastic brackets snap. Shock-swallowing foam finally stirs and bounces from the bubble wrap, covering an exhibition frame, beneath whose glass the very same drawing is back now, whence it came. I hold it up into the light, and black chalk from 5 centuries ago is still fresh as first sight. Will I bring it close up? A page with tiny writing no one sees, and only I now can set right. Thousands have looked this closely, though, and nothing here that I can gauge will count for much as these things go. It weighs so little, and yet all it's been worth, and it will be worth, is past counting, elemental, like tons of gold, deep in the earth. But in my 2 hands, at least where rain keeps washing the window clear, it waits for me to disappear. Having read you that poem which I like to think is practical in its way, it's as accurate as I could make it, I want to just add to the little collection here of things another poem from the book which I like, because I think it contains a lot of things that the rest of the book tries to explain, play with, discover things through in terms of imagery. It's a very short poem with the title Cinematic. Too late. But not too late for me to hide these sorry features somewhere in the shade. And having taken my eye off the page there, you'll notice I've already made a mistake, so I retake here. Cinematic. Too late. But not too late for me to hide these sorry features further in the shade, as huge projected faces loom and slide away into their screen. I want to go where images and ghosts stagger and slow, past time that passes over or below my heart, shunting its blood too late. And as the screen light glances from her now, she is beautiful like a star in the silent pictures. All eyes, and twice her life-size tall, falling away from me into nightfall. A shadow leaves its shadow on the wall.